All right. Well, I'm here with Thomas Smith, the General Counsel of Direct Energy. I'm really excited to have this conversation with Thomas, who has exemplified principles of leadership in the law, and really want to tease out a little bit of where that comes from. And welcome. Thank you for doing this with me.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be able to join, at least virtually, in the current environment that we're in.
Yeah, it's crazy times. I'm usually in Dallas, Texas, and I am sheltering in place since March 11th in Park City, Utah, where we came for spring break, and it's been the longest spring break I've ever had, but I haven't really gotten any vacation days yet. So, as cases spike in our two home cities of Houston and Dallas, you wonder when we're going to get back to having these meetings in person, but I certainly look forward to meeting you in person. Thanks for doing this. As usual, we haven't scripted this, but excited to start the conversation. I think I read, Thomas, you're from Tennessee originally. Is that true?
Well, I went to undergrad in Tennessee at Vanderbilt, but I grew up mostly in California, but we moved all over the U.S. So some time in New Jersey and Wisconsin before going out to Tennessee for undergrad and then out to California for law school.
Right. And you became a Commodore and you went to Stanford for law school, if I recall correctly.
That's right. Yeah.
So I want to start with that just a little bit. If there's anything about your upbringing, that instructs how you lead as a general counsel today, I'd love to hear about that.
It's a good question. I think we probably all don't pause to reflect on the experiences we've had, maybe as children, as young adults, and the way that shapes what goes into leadership. I do think what I mentioned before, having lived in many different parts of the U.S. has really helped to, understand that we certainly have differences, different parts of the country that we're in, and you get exposed to a lot more different people, different kinds of ways of thinking, some slight cultural differences depending on what part of the country you're in. And that all, I think, helps to broaden your outlook as a leader, and certainly being mindful of the fact that you do have employees that come from all over, and certainly in a business like we're in right now, I'm in a customer-facing business. We want to serve all of our customers, and we operate all around the United States. So you have to have an approach that doesn't seem too tailored to one particular group or one particular geography. You really have to think about the whole.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've worked very closely for 24 years with a partner in our litigation group, Beth Petronio, and she was an Air Force, I guess they called them Air Force brats, and she would travel all around, with her dad's job. And when we go on business trips, she always knows how to find everything. She remembers that because it was part of her, how she had to immediately learn places that she kept moving to and meeting different people. So you do see that in common with people who've moved around. That's very interesting. So tell me, what made you interested in going to law school? What was your passion for the law?
I think there's a path I followed that will probably resonate with a lot of U.S. lawyers, which is, in our country, unlike some other countries, you don't do law as an undergraduate focus. So you do something else. And then you're getting to your junior year and thinking about maybe what life looks like on the other side. And if you're not really looking to go into a career at that point, law school is out there as an area that is intellectually stimulating. It's thought to be financially rewarding. You can debate. You could do a whole nother session probably on that debate. But it's a natural fit for, I think, a lot of people that had a background similar to mine. So I had a history and economics double major. History is a topic I've always really been passionate about. It's most of my leisure reading and interest kind of on the side. But wanting to look at something you can really do as a career, the law really, I think, complemented areas I was already interested in. So there's probably some people that go through and say, well, I always wanted to be a lawyer. That wasn't something I would have probably said as a teenager. But as you get a little bit older and mature as an undergraduate, it is a choice that often comes to mind.
I know the feeling. I was a policy debater in high school and college, and it's almost like you have no choice but to go to law school. My dad always used to tell me, get a law degree and then you can use it however you want. It was funny. One of my recent podcasts was with somebody you may know, Ken Hirsch, who was the CEO of Natural Gas Partners. And Ken basically said to me, the economics of being a lawyer seem a little off compared to, the investment world. And that's definitely true. I don't think we joined this profession to get rich, but
right.
But there are other worthy goals. Tell me, I'm a student of history as well. What are some of the people that you've read about that you admire, and what did you take from them?
Well, that's a good question. So I won't try to take up the rest of our time with the topic, but I read a lot in certainly some American history, but a lot of European history as well. And as you go through periods of time, one of the things that strikes you, we oftentimes look at the past as this foreign kind of murky time where you can make a bunch of broad generalizations and assume you knew how things were. But once you get into it, you realize it's humans and people dealing with much the same challenges and struggles we have right now. Tensions between individual rights and the power of the state, tensions between one church or another, depending on what time or era that you're looking in. Many things about the rights of individuals, the role of women and others who are marginalized in society. These are all things that have been with us for hundreds of years. These aren't all new issues. And if you go back in a few hundred years, you find the roots of many of the things that people either enjoy now or struggle with now. And I think there's certainly people throughout, if you get into biography or look at particular individuals who led particularly interesting lives during times of sometimes challenge and crisis and kind of how they got through it. Even if we wouldn't agree or necessarily identify with all of their decisions in 2020, because they're from a different time period, there's a lot of good examples.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a Napoleon, a pretty recent Napoleon biography, and every one of those themes you just articulated comes through in that. And really how we've interpreted Napoleon, it's almost like a Rorschach test. This author talks about how you can interpret Napoleon as this horribly evil guy, or you can interpret him as this really groundbreaking visionary. But the truth is somewhere in between is where this particular biographer lands. But I got the bug. My dad had the largest allegedly private collection of Teddy Roosevelt books and materials. So I grew up with kind of this passion for Teddy Roosevelt. But your comment on kind of the times they live in, of course, he gave his stamp of approval to a book by this guy, Madison Grant, who wrote about eugenics that led to some of the race theories that Hitler used. So, we can step into some difficult corollaries to 2020, but I agree. You miss the lessons if you ignore all that stuff.
Yeah. It's needing to withhold, neither fully demonizing nor fully idealizing people from the past. I mean, there's some you can probably fully demonize, but there's most other people who are interesting. It's a mixed bag, and what you want to do is really understand them in their context before you make a judgment.
Yes, exactly. Well said. So I know after law school you went to V&E, a great. Mm-hmm. I mean, I grew up started at Hughes and Luce, and have a lot of friends at your old firm, a great firm. Mentors along the way, people, whether it was in college, law school, or your early career that kind of shaped who you are. And what was that lesson? Was there some example you can think of, some story?
Yeah, there were quite a few people at Vinson Elkins when I started. So I started there in 2002, and it was an interesting time for the firm because Enron had been a very significant client for the firm. And so I think there was probably, going into a transactional group at that time, the focus of the work, kind of the amount of work, especially they had for new associates, had changed a bit. And I was very agnostic in terms of what type of work I wanted to do. I didn't think, I want to be an M&A lawyer, I want to do this or want to do that. And I always counsel new associates at a law firm not to go in with a bunch of preconceived notions as to what things are, because once you start working on them, you find that they aren't what you think that they are at all. To me, it's more the fit of the people that you're in. So I remember a couple of years in getting involved in a complicated transaction that was going on. We were representing a borrower that had been borrowing on an unsecured basis and now was shifting, basically pledging a whole bunch of domestic and international assets. So we had this huge due diligence review to do. And I got to be alongside some of the really bright finance partners in the team going through agreements that were way over my head. I remember many long hours, especially, nights sitting up in conference rooms with just truly gifted, experienced, good teaching lawyers who could walk me through provisions. And that was one of those learning experiences that you just felt this huge learning curve from the beginning of that deal to the end. You would have liked to have gotten some of the nights and weekends back, but you certainly, the education that instilled was really great. Later in my years there, I got to shifted more into doing M&A work, primarily for a large client that was selling a lot of their merchant power facilities. And that got me introduced to auction style M&A deals and then all the ins and outs of a purchase and sale agreement. And again, what really set those apart were those good teachers who were willing to invest time in a kind of a green, younger associate. And once you get a couple of those under your belt, you can adequately do that work on your own. And that's a real feeling of accomplishment a few years in to be able to feel like, yeah, I could kind of work my way through one of these deals myself.
Yeah, it's the patience that's required because they're moving quickly. They're giving up their nights and weekends too, and then they're going to stop, pause, and bring you into the conversation to give you a bigger picture so you can actually learn. That's a really important concept, and I know from reading a lot about you, it's something you carry forward in the way you build teams today. So what if anything led you down the path of going to an outside legal position with the company?
That's a good question. So I guess that was around 2006, and I'd had about 4 years in at the law firm. There was a U.S. operations of a company called BG Group PLC, which was headquartered in Reading in the U.K. They were looking to add to their commercial legal team doing these new doing agreements for liquefied natural gas transactions all around the world. And I'd had a couple of colleagues that I knew at Vinson Elkins had already gone over into that shop. And so I was able to get a little bit of a little under the hood look at what was going on and get a pretty fair shake in what that was like. So a little bit was of, quality of life at firms is oftentimes difficult. And, especially at V&E, there was a lot of effort to have a work-life balance, but the nature of a lot of the work sometimes is it just doesn't lend itself to that. So a little bit of that, but also the adding international work to what I was doing. So a lot of that work at V&E had been domestic, and when I moved over to BG Group, it was virtually all international. And especially in the LNG field, that's an international field. With U.S. is a major contributor now, but in the middle of, I guess that's 2 decades ago now. Time flies. At that time, a lot of the focus was in Western Africa, Trinidad and Tobago, and then the U.S. more as a location for cargoes to be delivered. And of course, now we're one of the biggest exporting countries, so it's moved quite a lot. But it was that interest in that international work, which certainly paid off because the work for the 10 years I was at BG was quite varied, quite challenging, and really a great team to be part of.
Did you travel to some of those places that you mentioned?
Yes, we did. We had found that there was a pretty significant travel schedule because of the international nature of the work. And in doing liquefied natural gas, LNG transactions, you tended to, if you were going to be an off-taker, the seller or sponsor for the project would tend to meet with a number of different buyers in one city. So you may be in Rome or Spain or London or something like that for a period of time negotiating one of these really complicated agreements. And then for a couple of months, you're working on drafting, and then you have it in-person session again. So that was very much the cadence.
You talked a little bit about this at the beginning and moving it in your early years around a lot. And I know, it's one of the things that I appreciate and enjoy about my job. I travel a lot. I used to joke I traveled like a bad cold, but I don't make that joke anymore. But what are some of the things that you learned along the way from having to do work outside the United States and making those trips?
It's probably an additional degree of what I was talking about before, which is broadening your horizons and realizing that there are so many different ways of thinking, cultures, norms, things like that exist around the whole world. And the more of those you're exposed to, the more you just can't be inward looking or inward thinking anymore. I mean, it naturally broadens your outlook in so many different ways. I just think in the different ways that, different companies that have maybe a national basis or maybe are in a particular place, like a utility buyer in a particular part of the world that's very much steeped in the culture of that location, their approach to negotiating will be very different than sitting across from a counterpart at a major oil and gas company where you kind of know the swim lanes and how things work. So it really does it really does open your eyes to different perspectives. Plus just I found that international travel to be interesting. Just, after a series of negotiations, to be able to go find an interesting place for dinner, try to order something in whatever the language was and make the best of it. So if you welcome those new experiences and you're able to roll with those punches, I think it's a great career choice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It really shrinks the world for you if you're able to have pictured a place and pictured a different culture. Whether, as somebody who I know reads a lot, and you've talked about your love of history, did you do any preparation before you go to places to do negotiations?
With hindsight, I wish I'd done a lot more, because most of the preparation I would do would be, I've got this 100 odd page agreement, and I've got my positions all staked out, and I'm good to go, right? Whereas thinking about reading the room and the context and maybe what's particularly important to the other side in terms of their values or their approach to certain issues, I probably did a really poor job reflecting on that. And I think that's something I'd recommend to somebody. Also, when you're the lawyer, you do feel like, well, I've got our main way of operating at BG, we were very, very lean in terms of our negotiating teams. So it would generally be one lawyer and one commercial person at the meeting. And oftentimes we would show up and there may be 20 on the other side. And we would say, okay, we feel slightly outnumbered. But you'd lean on that commercial person as well for his or her insights and that relationship building that was there. I think for the lawyers, you were scrambling with so much paper and so many things to get right in the negotiation that you had a little bit of tunnel vision. So if I look back at myself, I would say, boy, building some connections and maybe being more attuned to the culture, the values, the interests of people on the other side, especially when dealing with government.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I hear it, we do these roundtables. I think I moderated 27 roundtables since this pandemic. It's, you realize, wow, I could have been doing this instead of relying just exclusively on traveling. And you get people from so many different industries on one call and different places in the world. And you really appreciate understanding their perspectives and insights. You and I have both watched the transformation of what it means to be an outside lawyer. And one of the ways that I've really observed is the table stakes used to be a really great lawyer, and now the table stakes include understanding a client's industry. If you were speaking to outside lawyers today, what would you say that you did maybe that helped you accelerate the learning curve on the industries that you were working in?
Boy, a couple of different things come to mind. One is that in any organization that you're in, you'll quickly find out who are the people that are knowledgeable, passionate, and willing to help others. And that maybe if you drew a Venn diagram, there may be just a small overlap. But if you find some person that has two or three of those three things, then you should really lean on him or her to teach you. Be open to ask questions, to be, quite humble when you start out as to what you don't know. I think if you come into an organization and feel like you should kind of know what's going on, or you said in the interview you really knew what was going on, you shouldn't ever hesitate to admit what you don't know, and especially use those early weeks and months and even years to be just voraciously learning as much as you can. But that really is finding the people that genuinely know and maybe have a passion for the subject. Having worked in energy, you think about people that put together these really complicated deals, or all the way down to the wholesale space, traders, people like that. These are people that generally like to talk about what they do. And my advice would be take advantage of it and absorb it. I've seen people, there's so many acronyms in our industry that I've seen people come up with little tables that write all the acronyms out. Some companies have acronym books, almost like a Bible of these things where you can look them up. I think any tips and tricks like that to just get more and more fluid with what's going on. One of the things that I think holds people back, especially mid-level, junior-level people, or who are new to an organization, from really offering or contributing everything that they can, is a feeling like, well, if I open my mouth, my ignorance might be revealed, or I might ask a stupid question. And so you can't tell people, well, there are no stupid questions. Because in truth, there are questions people can ask that the heads might all turn in the room and wonder what's going on. So maybe the solution is really invest in learning, really find those people that can teach you and that you can ask questions to on the side to say, everyone was talking about this in that meeting. What is it and what's going on? And hopefully the line manager should be doing a lot of that for the person's team as well.
Yeah, I'm hearing humility come through loud and clear, and being willing to take a little bit of risk, be a little vulnerable, and in learning about something. You may sound a little stupid if you're asking some questions, but most people want to help. So that's great advice. So talk a little bit about the transition you made to Direct Energy, and I'm going to get into how you built some teams there.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I had mentioned being at BG Group for about, I guess it was almost 11 years when all was said and done. We were bought by Shell in a deal that was announced in 2015 and closed in 2016. I think it was the biggest oil and gas takeover since the ExxonMobil deal. It was a really amazing process to be part of after it was announced, from a little bit of support around, diligence and sharing information with Shell, and then through the period of integrating two different legal teams. That was a fascinating experience, largely because there was while the companies were maybe 3 to 4x off in terms of market cap, it was a massive difference in terms of employees. We only had 5,000. And because we don't have really the downstream business that Shell does. So it was integrating those much smaller teams into Shell, very different ways of working, but unbelievably patient people on the other side of those conversations. And I think we did a good job with a lot of our people who are still at Shell and are doing quite well and are successful. Opportunity came up for this position at Direct Energy, where I am now. And I really eyed the opportunity to have that sort of general counsel experience. So a broad group of direct reports that are covering really all parts of the legal profession: litigation and employment law, commercial, M&A, and now that team includes compliance as well as our regulatory and policy folks. So it's really the whole gamut of the GC experience, broadly speaking. But it was also a big pivot for me because the businesses are very different. So at BG Group, we were not a customer-facing business, really didn't have that many end users, and now we're a company that has millions of individual customer accounts across North America. So the regulatory exposure, the commercial consumer law issues that come up, just the way that business operates has been a big learning curve, but a welcome one.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you get exposed to grassroots, so to speak. I mean, I remember I practiced a little bit longer than you. And when I was a baby lawyer at what was then Hughes & Luce, which we merged in 2008 to Cano Gates, I was picked to be one of the 2 people or 3 people to research how to get on the ballot in all 50 states for Ross Perot. So my direct dial was on the bottom of all of the nominating petitions that were circulated to every person. And I got, mostly just the most interesting phone calls and learning about people. But
I can imagine.
Yeah. In a customer facing role that you've got, you may not have as many as a young lawyer would have. You probably have others who would be having, dealing with those conversations, but it's still, you have to handle the impact of that. So I can relate a little bit. I had one question though about the integration, the Shell piece. Are there any things that you learned from that integration process? I mean, we do a lot of integration. One of the things I do is run our lateral partner integration process, and the merger integration process when we do mergers. Is there anything you picked up on that would be useful to people thinking about process for integrating 2 businesses or companies together?
There was a lot there. I think we all probably learned through that process. And in ours, quite naturally, the Shell framework and organization was the default organization, which made perfect sense. So it wasn't having 2 teams and then trying to create a third, merging of it. It was more like finding where there were either areas of overlap or maybe gap, and that we could fit people into there. I mean, one approach that Shell took, and I think a lot of companies take, is to say, well, we want to end up with the strongest team. So it's less important kind of where you started or where you came from. Another principle to think about is that You want to end up with a team that has a variety of different experience in it. So different skill sets, different expertise, as opposed to saying, well, it's just going to be the top people in each. That might not be a very good functioning team. You need to have different levels of experience within a team. So you really have to think about it holistically. And if your plan is you want something that is going to be robust over a number of different years, then that might lead you to a different model than saying, well, we're just going to score everybody today and pick the top 5 or top 10 or whatever it is.
It sounds like, making sure you look at the whole person as opposed to where they've, what their role has been historically. And you may have not there that you don't recognize you have unless you ask the right questions. That's great.
And realizing what that team may be asked to do in 3 years is different from what it's being asked to do today. And I would say anybody in the energy industry, that is always true. There's a bunch of things you're dealing with in 3 years that you didn't even dream about when you were putting your team together.
I mean, we're seeing it through the pandemic with prices. It's not for the faint of heart to be in the energy space. It's a fascinating space, fascinating industry. So you are known, I don't mean to make you blush, but you're generally thought of by the people who have worked with you as creating an environment, a safe space for people on the team to grow. I've heard that comment from more than one person. I really think that folks listening would benefit from hearing some of the specific techniques and tactics that you use to create safe spaces for your team.
Well, I haven't had that feedback from my team, but I'll certainly take your word for it. Got to think about that one a bit. So if I have to come at it, I mean, one way of coming at it is if you are my role, it's a manager of managers. And so each of the individuals who reports to me is a manager of his or her team as well. So there's a couple different things that leads to. One is that anyone who's in a general counsel role and has a team of any size, none of the questions that come to you are easy, and you're never the first person that's looked at them. So you always have to be respectful and mindful of, well, what path did this issue take to get to my inbox or my desk? And if you swing a wrecking ball through all the work that the team has done before and make them start over, it disempowers them greatly. And you have to realize that things that have gotten to the general counsel or AGC or whoever it is, got to his or her desk, will likely have quite a lot of hair on them. There will always be a political angle. And if you jump to say, well, why didn't we just do this? Your team should look at you and say, we thought of that. Trust me, we're not stupid. This is why it's more complicated than you think. So trying to do a lot of listening, trying to then enact solutions through those managers, so it doesn't look like you're cutting them off or cutting through them all the time, I think is really important. I do have the view that any lawyer of any level of experience is a professional and should be asked to have an opinion. And it may not be an opinion that we ultimately go with, but they should have their own thought as to how to handle something based upon their experience. And it's one that we could, maybe more seasoned people or maybe people from a different discipline, can add to that opinion. But there shouldn't be a lawyer that ever brings a challenge up the line to say, I have no idea what to do. Come with a recommendation, because if they've thought it through and they've taken the practice of developing a recommendation, even if that's not the recommendation we go with, they're so much better off the second, third, fourth, fifth time that an issue comes up, because they've gone through that thinking, right, I've got some difficult here. I need to advise the business. I need to advise the client what to do. They should practice that skill as much as they can.
How do you personally create an environment where people feel like I can go to the boss, even if I'm maybe not even a direct report to you, and give feedback? How do you create a welcoming environment for that feedback?
This is a difficult one, and I think that it's one I certainly don't get. I don't get any of this stuff right all the time. I don't know that I get it right often, and this is an area that I think it's slightly difficult, because on the one hand, you want to say anyone can come to talk to the general counsel, whoever it is, about anything at any time. That's a great culture to have. But at the same time, we do have teams and we do have managers, and we don't want to be, like I was saying before, in a position where you're undercutting managers. So part of it is, if a team member is going to come and talk about something outside the reporting line, is, first of all, there could be some anxiety about that, and you want to hold those things in confidence. And then if it is a matter that you as the GC feel like you need to take some action on, how you do that is critically important for your own role, for the other manager in the team, for that team member who has come to you. But I think the best way to go about it is to really make yourself make time when people reach out. We have I'm not an open plan, right? I guess I'm an open plan right now. I'm in a bedroom where there's a desk, so you can tell me whether that's open plan. But in our office, our Houston headquarters, we have a completely open plan environment. So if you wanted to hide, you couldn't. And I can tell there's some people that are quite comfortable to come by to talk about things. And I think it's good visibly to see me sitting down with a team member, either, on the floor or in a conference room or something, talking about something, and people to feel like, okay, he has an interest in what's going on and the issues that are there, because I genuinely do. So some of it is just being visible and making yourself available and being approachable.
Yeah, I can definitely see how your affect too creates a non-judgmental kind of learning approach. I mean, if you're genuinely curious, like you very much are, I mean, it comes from your love of history and everything else. Just you seem like a very curious person. Then people feel safe sharing their thoughts. That's a wonderful lesson. I'm glad you shared that. So we find ourselves in very anxious times. I mean, you're in an industry where at one point I think it was cheaper. You had to pay to get a barrel of oil, right? I mean, we had a day where it was negative for a minute. Yeah. People are having family members die. I had a friend, 54 years old, 32 days on a ventilator, over 50 in the ICU. He survived, thankfully, but a lot of anxiety. The George Floyd murder has brought out huge anxiety in our society and a conversation. And you mentioned the concept of listening. And we as a society are listening more and more. But as somebody who values diversity and inclusion, can you talk a little bit about how you're communicating through the last few months with your team and how it might have changed from where it might have been in 2019?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, because you're right to set it up by focusing on the multitude of challenges just focusing on our country right now, the challenges that we've had this year between the pandemic, that concern about health and safety and what it means to stay healthy and safety, and all these rules and steps we're taking that would have seemed completely bizarre 12 months ago, plus the economic impact of lockdown, fits and starts in terms of reopening here and there. I saw earlier today that Governor Abbott's closing the bars again in Texas. So that's not going to be won't be welcome news, certainly for some. But then on a much more serious note, what's taken place more recently with the protests that have taken place following along the lines of really horrific video footage of police brutality and excessive force that was used. And, one of our points is that this is not a singular event. It's a series of events that have taken place all too often. It's just that these things are getting more and more visibility now, which I think is a good thing, because the more people can see and things can be transparent, you can say, well, I can make a judgment as to whether that's bad or good, or what kind of action needs to be taken to fix it. I do feel like this is an area that I probably could do a lot more, or that me and the leadership should do more, because we talk with our teams and we can have listening sessions with our teams. And I'm happy we do have a diverse team. So we have members from, with a variety of different ethnic background, as well as parts of the country they've been in. There's a good mix between men and women in the team. We would always like to improve, especially at the senior levels, but we feel like through the recruiting we've done in the last couple of years, we feel like we've made an emphasis having feelers out to a diverse group of candidates, and therefore have gotten in a diverse group in the door. So we've done some work to listen and allow folks who feel particularly like they have something heavy on their heart about the current issues to be able to express that with other team members, just so that those who maybe haven't had the same experiences can hear what our colleague next door is thinking and feeling, what he or she is is thinking about their own safety, the safety of their family members. What's it like to walk in their shoes? We've had some of those conversations, but you always then feel the challenge of, well, what's next? So you've done listening and talking, but what does action look like? And that's where it then gets more, I think, a little bit more difficult in corporate America.
It is. I think everybody's struggling with that, how to actually act to create change. If we all agree, which I think we do, that we need to create change, how do we do that? And I do think it's very important that as a part of that to fully listen. I know that we sent out a resource kit for things to read, things to watch, to try to be better listeners, be more sensitive to these issues. Thank you for sharing that. It's a tough topic for everybody, but I know it's been a passion of yours. I mean, this passion for diversity and inclusion long predates the events of 2020. So I knew you'd have something insightful to say. So as I know you've got a large family. If one of your children wanted to go to law school, what would you tell them? Would you encourage them to? Would you give them advice? What would your advice be?
Well, I would be talking scholarship first. I think that's very important, and not to borrow all the money. That would be that might be thing one. I think it's a good profession. It's a very good choice, and it's not like you have to do it just because. You should only do it if you know you want to be a lawyer or you're particularly passionate about it. Because day one of law school, I'm not sure I was there, and then many years later, here we are. I would probably have a conversation to like in all things, like, well, why? What's your motivation or what's your drive? And I think if you ask the average person what a lawyer does, they'll picture a movie, they'll picture Law and Order, they'll picture things that it's maybe like half of 1% of the profession, and they don't realize what the rest of the profession really does. But I would go further to say, if you did realize it, you'd say, oh, that's something I could see myself doing. Could you see yourself having an important role in government? Could you see yourself in an interesting job in the corporate world, or maybe working with a startup, or maybe working in an area like civil rights, or maybe you're passionate about criminal prosecution or criminal defense, or both? You could see all those different areas as to what our colleagues really do with the law, and I think they'd be quite interesting. And we can accommodate a large degree of backgrounds and a large degree of personality types. So if you're somebody that says, I really want to get steeped into an area that might be a bit esoteric and become a subject matter expert, we've got that. If you want to be interacting with people all day, we have that too. It may not be the same thing, but you can do really all of those things in the law.
Yeah, that's a great answer. It deconstructs a little bit of the why of why we do this. And I mean, like you, I've watched people who are lawyers at times because of the financial rewards. And that's a very empty why. It's not an enduring why. And so getting behind the why is an important objective. So let me ask you a little bit different question, which is, you are Thomas Smith back in the days of V&E, and you now are Thomas Smith, but you've had injected into you the knowledge you've had from 15-plus year career in-house, and now a leader of a very important legal department at a very large company. What would you like to have told that Thomas Smith back, 15, 17 years ago that you couldn't have known?
I think a couple of things I would want to inject into the younger self. One would be patience, because I think when you're our system here is interesting, and versus the UK and Europe, where there's a trainee period and things like that, where you get more of an introduction. You just pop out of law school, you take the bar, and you're suddenly a lawyer. You don't really necessarily know what you're doing, and you show up at a firm. And you can feel, I remember conversations with people my first year who were worried whether they're getting exposure to the right type of work right away. And you look at all that and go, boy, with the passage of time, just relax. Don't be so worried what the next couple of weeks look like. And then be patient in terms of the learning curve. If you're an associate at a law firm, you should look at this as a bit more of a long game. You're learning, you're experiencing things, you're expected to be productive, and you should want to be. productive. But, day to day, week to week, don't worry about what trajectory you're on, because there's too many other things in life to worry about at that time. So definitely that concept of patience. The other would be, again, kind of what I was saying before, just always be eager to latch on to those people who are good teachers and see that as a good time investment. And the final thing is that one of the things you learn at a law firm that stands out is you'll have a number of people in your class or in your department who are all excellent lawyers. But if you can also be a really good team player, where you're low maintenance, you're willing to roll up your sleeves and do whatever is needed, especially on a big transaction or something like that, that's another way that you will get asked to work with better and better people. You'll get asked to work on better and better deals. And that becomes kind of a virtuous cycle where now you're finding that you're in demand if you're fortunate, and the quality of work and experiences that you're having is just going up and up.
It's such a great point. I had at one point I was giving some presentations to our associates, and I stumbled across I think it was Under Armour commercial with Michael Phelps, and he's in like a dirty pool at 3 a.m, and obviously dramatized, but at the end the message was, it's what you do in the dark that matters. And to me, that's what you're saying, which is, look, don't always say, look at me, but actually do the things that need to be done in the moment and do the right thing. And someone's going to see it eventually, even if you think it's in the dark, eventually you'll be on the stage. And it's a fantastic message. So I know I've taken up a lot of your time today. This has been, by the way, a great conversation. We have never met. A lot of the podcasts I do usually are with people I really have, spent time with and things like that. But in reading up on you, I was very excited to do this, and you did not let me down. This has been fantastic.
Well, thank you.
Last question would be, is there a book that you either have on your nightstand right now, because I know you're a big reader, or you've had it on your nightstand in the last 6 months that you would say, this was really kind of a game changer?
There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and I think there's a co-author. I can't remember his name.
Amos Tversky.
Okay, yes, I got the easier name right.
Yeah.
There's myriad books about psychology, and then touching on behavioral economics and things like that. But I think if I would recommend that book as a read, because it completely will change the way you think about thinking and think about other people.
Boy, I've read that book too, and I couldn't agree more. And for those, to give context to it, I mean, what they basically started with was processing, almost training the Israeli, the IDF to handle terrorist risks and attacks and things like that. And so it was all started on that. But these are brilliant. I mean, I think Tversky's now passed away. He was a Stanford guy, if I recall correctly. Your legal alma mater. But yeah, no, that's a great one. Well, again, thank you for your time. I really look forward to meeting you in person, and one day when we can break bread and maybe even do it without a face mask.
And maybe the bars will be reopened by then.
Exactly. But in the interim, I just want to thank you again for your time, your vulnerability, your candor, and look forward to the next time.
Very good. It was a pleasure. Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Have a great weekend.